Okay, good morning, everyone. I wanted this week to move from what's become quite a nitty-gritty, effectively sort of parsha, which wasn't the intention of this, to back to sort of the higher order thinking around this issue. But to summarize what we've said so far, we've seen that there's layers of meaning to the Passukim, Peshat and Peshat and Midrash principally in our discussion. According to later sources, they speak about 4 layers: Peshat, Remez, Drush, and Sod. There's different tiers or different ways of reading the text, and we've effectively seen what appears to be a machlokas rishonim, perhaps, as to the relationship between these different ways of reading the Passukim. Are these alternatives or complementary? That's one discussion. And the second discussion is when we talk about Peshat, do we mean something in contrast to Midrash, or do we simply mean, in a sense, picking the Midrashim that best align with the Peshat? When Rashi says Ayin Mikra, when Rashi says Einiba Peshuto Shel Mikra, I'm coming to explain the Peshuto Shel Mikra. Rashi means by that, seemingly, I'm choosing the Midrashim, which are miyashev, which settle the Passukim best contextually. But Rashi's endeavor of learning Peshat really meant choosing between Midrashim a lot of the time, or maybe not all the time, but certainly a lot of the time. When the Rashbam or the Ibn Ezra or even the Ramban more rarely talk about Peshat vis-a-vis Midrash or vis-a-vis Chazal, they're happy to say there's a purpose in reading Peshat, even though the halacha will perhaps be determined by the Drash. And don't forget, when we talk about Midrash and halacha over here, we don't just mean Midrash in the sense of agadata or stories or the like. We also mean in halachic terms. There's many examples where the midrashic or the drash reading is of halachic nature, and the halachic reading is fixed by that of Chazal and the Midrash, even though the Rishonim think there's a purpose in discussing Peshuto Shel Mikra, which may well contradict the halachic or midrashic reading. And we discussed what the purpose of that reading might be. Why bother with Peshat? If anyway, we're not talking about Karaim over here, we're not talking about Karaites. Ibn Ezra is waging a war on the Karaites, and yet he still sees a point in saying Peshat, sometimes against Chazal. The Rashbam is even willing to go further and say this about very basic principles, how we translate what determines the beginning and end of the day. And the Rishonim don't, as far as I'm aware, they don't really discuss this explicitly. They don't explain the philosophy behind this. And we saw various examples of where the Peshat adds a layer of meaning to the Passukim, even if it's not the halachic determinant. So we saw that maybe in the context of Ayin Tachat Ayin, the Safano, that says that fundamentally the punishment should be capital punishment. Damaging another human being is not a monetary offense. Maybe this has implications in practical halacha. In that the mechila, the forgiveness achieved for damages, when it comes to monetary damages, it's enough just to compensate, but when it comes to bodily damages, one also has to be mevakesh mechila, one has to ask for mechila. We saw that maybe with the Nimrod story, where the Ibn Ezra is willing to say, look, Peshuto Shel Mikra is that Nimrod was a tzaddik, Gibor of Hashem. Maybe adds a nuance to Nimrod's complex character. He's not just a Rasha, there's also something very positive about him. So we saw why there's perhaps purpose in layers of meaning. And finally, we saw the language that the scholars of the 1800s and early 1900s who embarked on a renewed look at Peshat used. The Meshech Chochmah, the Malbim, Samson Raphael Hirsch, so Tamima, Ksav Kabbalah, a whole range of thinkers and Talmidei Chachamim who relooked at this issue, and they spoke about Midrash as being Omek Peshat, the depth of Peshat. So if you really probe with care the language of the Passukim, you'll see that actually what they're uncovering is Omek Peshat, the depth of the Peshat. If you really look at the language used for Ayin Tachat Ayin, you'll see that we shouldn't think of this as Midrash and Peshat, they argue, but we should understand that this is Peshat. The I in place of an I must mean monetary compensation, because if one really looks at it, as they're arguing, there's a mistake to think of Midrash as anything other than the incredible and phenomenal reading of the great Tanoim and Amoraim, who read Passukim with enormous sensitivity to the language and pick up every nuance. And what they're revealing to us really is Omek Peshat. They're telling us that there's a depth of Peshat in this rather than an alternative. So these were some of the things that we've seen till now. What I want to look at is where some of this was taken. and just sort of an understanding of how much some of this discussion informs our reading of the Passukim. Now, Ras Gon in or maybe actually I'll start with a later figure than Ras and then we'll go back to Ras Gon. So the Rambam emphasized again and again that when we something that we take so for granted that perhaps we don't notice the chiddush and the innovation within this. The Rambam emphasized again and again that when the Passukim give descriptions of Hashem, we need to understand that this is metaphor. This isn't meant to be understood in the literal sense. We should understand that this is a way of human language. Torah is Torah, but it's the Torah speaking to humans, trying to describe to us that which is incomprehensible, that which is beyond comprehension, and that which must, by definition, be understood in a certain and particular way. Now, the Rambam uses this in two senses, one of which has become very popular and very taken for granted, and the other one which remains still less well understood. The first context in which the Rambam said this was in the terms of physical descriptions of Hashem. So we take this as for granted nowadays. When the Pasuk says that Hashem has a yad chazaka, strong hands, or zeroya natuya, an outstretched arm, it is obvious to us that this is metaphor for great strength or great reach. When the Pasuk says, Einei Hashem elokech, this is Eretz Asher Einei Hashem elokech, the eyes of Hashem on this, it's obvious to us we don't mean eyes with eyeballs and pupils and optic nerves. We mean a vision, the vision of Hashem. When the Pasuk talks about Vayecha af Hashem, we understand it doesn't mean that literally his nostrils flare or he fumes. We understand it to mean anger and a mode of relationship. So this has become taken for granted. The Rambam elaborates on this at great length in his Mo'en Avachim, but he also speaks about this in his Yesod HaTorah. So it's in Mishnah Torah. It's not just it's in his halachic work. The Rambam in his halachic work paskins this, as it were. He says this is at the beginning of Hilchos Yesod HaTorah. He says this is obvious that whenever the Torah uses this sort of language, it should be understood as moshul or melitza. It should be used as parable and turn of phrase, or parable and metaphor. And when the Pasuk says, Yoshev b'shemaim yischak, so Pasuk in Tehillim, the one who sits in the heavens laughs, Hashem neither sits nor does he laugh. And we understand that we understand what this means. We understand this means a sort of a metaphor. Now, this particular view of the Rambam, whilst having its detractors, basically won the argument. There's no arguments about this nowadays. I think everyone takes this for granted. And the truth is, even in the life of the Rambam and soon afterwards, when there were waves of controversy around the thoughts of the Rambam, this aroused relatively little controversy, which either indicates that most people thought the same, or at least that they were open to this. This wasn't considered controversial. The Rambam, of course, paskins this as an ikar in his Yotze Mikra. He says the idea that Hashem has no body is a fundamental of faith. And even though the Raiva, and we looked at this extensively when we looked at fundamentals of faith, even though the Raiva disagrees in the sense that the Rambam says, he says this isn't an ikar, you're not a heretic for doubting this, because there are Rabbim and Tovim who didn't understand this point and thought that you can somehow learn the Passukim literally. Even the Raiva, who argues it's not a fundamental of faith, doesn't think that that's what the Passukim means. He just says if you make a mistake over it because you've been misled by the simple language of the Passukim or the Midrashim, you're not a heretic. So it's an argument about whether you're a heretic for saying this. But he doesn't seriously consider the possibility that that's actually what the Passukim mean. To the best of my knowledge, we don't really have a particular preserved tradition of Rishonim who argued with the Rambam and explicitly thought otherwise. There's a few sources here and there. There's Rashi who uses the language of Midrash and doesn't emphasize this point to the Rambam. He's happy to use physical language about God. But again, that doesn't mean that that's what Rashi held. It simply means that Rashi is a paraphrase of Midrash, and Midrash uses this language. In a sense, there's not much more support from Rashi than there is from the Midrashim. But don't point this out. There was one of the Rishonim, a very important Rishon actually, but from the Bali Tosis, Moshe Taku, who seemed to use physical language. Again, he means something more sophisticated than just claiming that God has arms and legs. If you look at what he's often cited in the sorts of academic works as a Rishon who was happy with anthropomorphism. In fact, he says 2 points which are more subtle than that. The first point he says is that he believes that if God so chose, he could give himself physical apparatus, and he believes that that's part of the infinite possibility or potential of God. If God can do anything, he can choose to do it, and therefore he doesn't label it as the Rambam, but therefore those who argue against anthropomorphism and argue that it can't possibly be that Hashem has a yad chazak as well in the Torah should hesitate before they say this, because God can choose to do what he wants. And the second point he makes, this I'll come to in a moment, the second point he makes is effectively a profound critique of philosophy as a whole when dealing with God. And basically his point is, and again we discussed this when we looked at fundamentals of faith, is that we shouldn't sort of try and outthink the Torah. If the Torah uses this language, this is the best way we can relate to it. And to try and sort of think conceptually beyond that is a pointless endeavor. So even the sort of most extreme sources we have, which are open to some physical imagery in truth being used about Hashem, don't go very far down that direction. They're also acknowledging that this is to do with the infinite power of God and to do with the struggles that finite beings have in talking about God, and nothing more than that. The final source, which again is a difficult source to know what to make of, is that there is a type of Midrash, a Kabbalistic Midrash, which called Shir Komar, which speaks about the dimensions of God's existence. Speaks about him being thousands upon thousands of amos tall, and his arm being this long, and his head being this wide, and various other things. And again, given this as a midrashic text, whilst maybe some understood it to be literal rather than metaphor, that it seems that that certainly the sources we've received understood this as the language of metaphor. So just to summarize what I've said so far, in the context of our discussion, without noticing it, in a sense, we all slip into either Midrash or Midrash as Omek Peshat when we read certain Passukim. So my point being as follows: if you understand Peshat to be the simplest translation of the Passukim, we all veer off Peshat quite casually, without noticing it or worrying about it or spelling it out, whenever we learn Passukim that seem to use physical language of imagery when describing God. And we do this, in a sense, using philosophical reason. Because, as the Rambam points out, when you think with care about what we mean by God in this language, it's clearly ridiculous, we're happy to slip away from literal translation. So what is this? Well, really, the vocabulary to describe this depends on how on our earlier discussion. Either we could say that this is the Pshat, the simplest meaning of the Passukim is physical, but the Pshat has no relevance because we need to move to the language of Midrash. Or we could say that the Midrash is revealed in Omek Peshat, because the depth of Peshat can't be to understand and translate the words literally, because that doesn't make any sense. Philosophically, it must mean that this is really the Omek Peshat, this is really the depth of Peshat. But within the context of our discussion, at least if one maybe superficially translates Peshat as the simplest meaning of the words, when one understands simplest to mean that which is closest to translation or the like, we're forced to move into the realm of Midrash. Or to put this differently, whenever we read a text, as I began, we're coming in with certain assumptions about how the text works. And it's too superficial to think that the only assumption about how the text works is simplest literal meaning of the words, because we always read texts with various assumptions, no matter what the text is. And we discussed assumptions that Chazal had about how the text of the Torah works. Again, I want to emphasize, when I say assumptions, I don't just mean they're randomly assumed. That there may be good reasons for these assumptions, but there's sort of axioms or premises with which we enter into understanding how the text works. And for the Rambam, it's obvious that basic theology, basic common sense or reason about how God works I'll come to a moment, how God works is part of the assumption or axioms about how the text should be read. And therefore we move away from the simplest translation of the text to maybe a quasi-midrashic reading, because this is the only way to understand it. In a minute, we'll look at, according to one model, what's the point of this double strata of reading? Why is there a Pshat reading and a sort of midrashic reading? But the main point I want to make is that what vocabulary we use is a little confused here, because it depends on how we understand the relationship between Pshat and Midrash. But certainly, simple reading of the words, where simple is narrowly defined as just easiest translation, we all casually move away from that the whole time when we read Passukim, and move into a reading premised upon an assumption about what the nature of this text is, which perhaps is called Midrash, depending on how we understand the concept of Midrash, whenever we read descriptions of Hashem that appear to be physical. We had at least three questions here, so I'm happy to work my way through. Yes.
Is it not mentioned in the Gemara where shows equal reality? And if it's not, perhaps that indicates that it's axiomatic. But also leading on from that, I can't, in our discussion all these weeks, I can't remember if we've actually ever quoted the Gemara on this whole topic.
So I did start off with various Gemaras, including Ein Mikra Yotze Miydai Peshuto, and the idea that this was not obvious to all the Amoraim. In terms of your question about does the Gemara ever state God's incorporeality? Does it ever spell this out? Not 100%, not entirely. There are plenty of Gemaras which speak about and really Passukim that speak about the impossibility of seeing Hashem. But the question is, why is it impossible to see Hashem? I mean, the Torah says this, right? Moshe turns to Hashem and says, "Ha'inina kvodecha, lo yirani adam v'chai," says Hashem, a person can't see me and live, and the like. But is this that a person, ayin lo rasa l'kim zelosecha, in various languages that the Passukim use, really, Passukim both in Torah Shabbat and Chamisha Torah and in Nach, and many Chazals. But is this merely because God is so big, so large, so powerful, so radiant that a human can't see? Or is this because the whole concept of seeing is ridiculous in physical seeing, in the context of a non-corporeal God, isn't entirely spelt out? There's metaphors used. I think Rabbi Kiva uses the idea of, I believe it's Rabbi Kiva, I may be misquoting. If we can't look at the sun without being blinded, which is merely a servant of Hashem, how can we expect to look at Hashem? But the challenge here is that Chazal didn't use the language of philosophers. They chose not to be systematic philosophers, or that wasn't the way they operated, the way they thought best to operate, whatever it may be. They used the language of Midrash, right, and poetry and metaphor and Agadah and stories to teach ideas. And the advantage of that, the reason we Jews didn't do philosophy till the Greeks, and particularly via the Arabs, taught us to do philosophy, is because philosophy is algorithmic, it's rules, it's abstract, rather than emerging from an almost organic sense of experience. Again, I've used this analogy before, and I'll just use it again. There are two ways you can learn French. You can either learn French in the classroom, in which you learn rules of grammar and vocabulary and you memorize lists, or you can go and live in France for 6 months with French peasants who have never heard of the word pluperfect, but you just speak French naturally because you immerse yourself in an immersive experience. Most kids, when they start learning French in year 7 or dikduk in Oshanago, just say, oh, that's really interesting because in English we don't have a pluperfect form. Now, of course we do, but you never think about rules of grammar because you just grow up naturally speaking a language. So mother tongue isn't thought about like that. Now, each system has an advantage. The advantage of learning it systematically is you do learn rules and perhaps you make less mistakes and the like. The advantage of learning it organically is you live it, you breathe it, you're immersed in the culture, you think like that in a way that you can never really get from the classroom. Chazal, the best suggestion I'm aware of as to why Chazal didn't do philosophy but instead chose to do poetry and agadah and stories and so on, is because they wanted it to be an organic, immersive experience. They didn't want to step back and as outsiders sort of look and systemize it. They want to do it in an immersive way. And I have to tell you, this is consistent in how Chazal operate. This shift from immersive, organic learning to removed algorithmic learning has taken place in all realms of Torah. So in Lomdus, for example, Chazal did not do what Reb Chaim Brisker did, in which or the Shef Shmaitzer does, in which there's no Gemara that does what we would like to do, which says, okay, I'm going to give you all the rules of how to deal with a Sofik. There's Rov, and there's Chazaka, and there's Fexfeka, and there's Miat, and there's Miat Umatzu. They never did that. They didn't do that. There's scattered case studies, and out of that we are sort of almost, out of that we draw legal principles. That's the frustration of learning Gemara and the fun of learning Gemara. Chazal saw it as an advantage that Divrei Torah are niyim b'makom echad and ashirim b'makom acher, that they're poor in one place and rich in other places, that you can't understand halachic principles without putting together numerous cases, right? How to deal when there's an argument in monetary matters. There's no Gemara that systematically lays these out. There's scattered cases, and out of them we draw it. So there's a consistent pattern in Chazal in which they preferred organic, immersive experience rather than sort of externalized experience. And I have to tell you, to this day, in many ways, the strength and weakness of the Onam yeshivas is around this point. And it's the same thing when you go to yeshiva. No one really sits you down most of the time. No one sits you down and says, I'm going to give you a vocabulary, I'm going to explain to you the history of the different regions in which the Amoraim operated, the relationship between the generations, the mechanism of learning. They said, we're going to throw into the deep end, start learning Gemara, and we want you to sort of draw out the principles out of that. The only yeshivas that do the systematic approach are those that are helping people who come later in life to learning and therefore have to do that. But a yeshiva that offers someone the learning experience of, at age 18, you leave school and now we're going to give you learning experience of yeshiva, throws people straight in the deep ends, and as they want to create an immersive experience rather than one in which you're sort of being taught about it as an outsider. So we don't have, the result of this is, frustratingly or not, however it is, we do not have, as to the best of my knowledge, systematic philosophical thinking of Chazal in this style that we're talking about, in which we saw this again with the Rashbam and the Ezra and Rashi. None of them stop and do sort of what we would call metacognition and explain to us what they're doing. They just do it. And somehow out of that, we meant to, they say, come along on a journey with me, like learn Torah with me. I'll hold your hand, says Rashi, through learning Torah. And by the end of it, you'll understand how Torah works and what to do. Rather than, I'm going to spend 6 weeks teaching you the principles and the rules of learning Torah, and then you'll be able to do it. So in direct answer to your question, we don't have a Chazal which is inarguably saying, or a Pasuk that inarguably saying the Rambam's philosophical point. It may just be saying you can't see God because God shines very brightly, and he's too big for us and too bright for us to see. Sorry, go on. Yes.
It's not a question of the philosophy.
Okay, so 2 points. In a moment, we'll look at Sadigan's principles, which I know you're aware of, in which he discusses when can you move away from the simplest translation, and he says there's four rules, and one of the rules we could call philosophy or reason, and one of them we could say contradictions within Passukim. But really, I want to refer you to my answer to the previous honourable gentleman, because it's the same thing. The Rambam does bring proof texts of his philosophical ideas, but none of these proof texts, as you know, are inarguable. They are Passukim like the ones I just quoted. Yes and no. First of all, resolution of contradictions is a midrashic tool. So part of the endeavor of Midrash is to say not just, at least perhaps, is rather than just looking at localized. We saw examples of maybe what's Midrash, maybe Peshat, depends how you understand these things. So one pasuk says that an eved that's nit, so that's ears bored, should go out in the Yovel, and another pasuk says that la'olam should stay forever. So how do we resolve these two things? And the answer may be a midrashic reading of a drasha of Chazal to understand how the two fit together. Or when we find a contradiction in Passukim, and Chazal say this pasuk that looked like it was saying A really means B, or it looked like it was talking in generalized sense and it really means only a particular circumstance. All of that, in a sense, is Midrash. What label we give it is a machlokas rishonim, whether that's an expanded type of Peshat or it's Midrash. But the endeavor of taking a pasuk which very clearly seems to be saying A and saying no, it means B because of another parsha in the Torah or because of philosophical implication is a type of drasha. That's what I'm saying. So yeah. Yes. Yeah. So thank you for reminding me of that, and this is a very, very important point. I mentioned this at the beginning of the series on Peshat and Midrash. There's a consistent machlokas between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Kiva over, for example, double languages in the double language. Nothing titting, you should surely give. Abay to Abdun, you should surely destroy. Hashiv Tashiv, you should surely return with Hashavas Aved and the like. And there's a consistent machlokas whether these simply should be understood as turns of phrase. Dibra Torah Koloshim B'nei Adam, the Torah speaking in human language, or no, there's a drasha, there's an extra halacha being taught by this double language. And in to sort of use modern phraseology to try and understand it, the machlokas is over one of the axioms of what sort of text this is. One way of looking at the text is, of course, the text is given by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but it's given to us human beings. And therefore, it's legitimate to learn the text, the speaking in human language. Who else is the Torah communicated to, if not to us human beings? The Torah is designed to arouse emotions, to emphasize points, to use human phraseology and style of speech in order to communicate things. If you heard me speaking when I was giving a drasha, and I repeated an idea in different language, and you wanted to derive greater depth, like make a drasha of what I'm trying to include with a greater language, that would be ridiculous. I'm speaking in public, that's rhetoric, how one speaks. The nature of of language used is meant to be effective communication. By the way, I mentioned earlier that the Torah doesn't and Chazal didn't do systematic philosophy. They wanted to give an immersive experience. Again, kaviyachol, and I don't mean this comparison in anything beyond the very, very trite and superficial. But I think I mentioned this before. When Shakespeare teaches us a lot about philosophy and a lot about psychology, but he does it in a very different way to Freud or to a systematic philosopher. He gets you into a certain immersive experience from which one gets greater depth and insight. Any great work of art does this. So in a great work of art in Shakespeare, you can't ask why he's using double language in a turn of phrase. You understand that it's trying to immerse you in an atmosphere. And when we learn poetry, explicit poetry in the Torah, the Shira or Hazinu, of course we try and understand what the double metaphor is for. Because even in poetry, you understand why the metaphor conveys something else, but we don't expect it to be a sort of technical answer. We understand it to be a mood type of answer. So one approach in Los Titain is, this is how human language works. The other approach is, no, it's coming to teach us an extra halacha. This is a technical document. If you're reading instructions as to how to operate your washing machine, and it tells you two separate lines, do not answer me by saying this is poetry. Do not answer me by saying this is Dibra Torah B'Lashon B'nei. It's a technical manual, and therefore it must be conveying some extra specific instruction in how to operate the machine. And if you argue that plug in the socket and press the switch means the same thing, your washing machine won't work. It's missing the nature of what the document is. So the alternative view is the Torah it should be understood as at least one level of reading of the Torah is as a legal journal, a technical manual. You can't read works like that and expect them to, you can't say Dibra Torah that this is a turn of phrase or the like. So there's a machlokus around the parameters of the concept of Dibra Torah B'Lashon B'nei. The Rambam indeed takes it much further, because the Rambam says the tool I am using to justify reading Yalta Chazaka's Roya Natuya as meaning metaphor is Dibra Torah B'Lashon B'nei. Because in human language, the best way to describe action from afar is an outstretched arm. The best way to describe might of deeds is a strong hand. So the Rambam says this is all part of Dibra Torah B'Lashon B'nei Adam. But ultimately, he's saying Peshat, which he's saying a reading which is at least on some level not Peshuto Shel Mikra. I want to be hesitant over here, because you could argue there's a semantic problem over here. You could argue that this is Peshuto Shel Mikra. Reading this as metaphor is the simplest reading, and that's true. But at least it means that we need to recognize that moving away from simple translation to a more nuanced reading or a more subtle reading is a journey. And according to some Rishonim, that's what we mean by the concept of Midrash, particularly if it's driven, as Gav said, by contradiction between Passukim. Okay, so this is one. Sorry, yes. Yeah.
When a sentence ends or appears to end, and there seems to be like a pause or a gap.
Yes.
There's no, not looking at words, you're simply looking at what appears to be sentences stopped.
Yes.
Halfway through, three-quarters
Yes.
through, and then there's nothing.
Okay, so I'm now, you're 100% correct. I'm not just looking at translation, we're looking at phraseology and structure of sentences and many, many other things. I mentioned again at the beginning, right at the beginning when I spoke about, either actually in this series or in Torah Sheba'al Peh, maybe I'm misremembering, spoke about that even the voweling or the punctuation of the Passukim is a type of interpretation. So how you vowel a pasuk, I didn't speak about this in Peshat and Midrash, I spoke about this in Torah Sheba'al Peh when we spoke about Torah Sheba'al Peh. Even the very reading of a text and how you pass a sentence and where you put the commas and how you vowel the words is an oral tradition of sorts. You can look at the text of the Torah as just letters. And whether you read Bereshis Bara Elikim in the beginning of God created, or Bereshis Bara Elikim in the beginning of the creation of God, is in letters isn't going to appear different. It's only going to appear different in voweling. So how you punctuate sentences, how you divide sentences, how you pass the words, how you vowel it is also part of this is all part of Torah Sheba'al Peh, in a sense part of an attempt to get Peshuto Shel Mikra. Let me try and just maybe step back, because maybe I'm not making myself entirely clear, and hopefully then we'll go back to examples. And maybe I should have started this way around, start top down rather than starting the Rambam and examples. Rav Gaon in his wrote a sefer in Arabic called Emunah V'Deus, belief and philosophies or the like, and in it he discusses this issue of when you can take a pasuk away from its literal sense. And in a sense, this is where I'm coming from. Either wrongly or rightly, I'm for now, in a sense, using Peshat as a synonym for literal. And anything which takes a pasuk away from its literal, we're talking about beyond Peshat. Again, I don't want to get caught up in semantics about whether maybe this all should be called Peshat. But basically, the Rav Sadigan says as follows. He says, if you read a pasuk and you want to take it away from its literal meaning, you only have one of four justifications to do that and no more. One is when it's rejected by observation of the senses. So it says something which is clearly not empirical, something clearly against the way the world is. So if a pasuk would say the sun is blue, we would know that that pasuk can't be understood literally. He gives an example of that, very interesting pasuk again, which is so interesting because things which the Rishonim felt the need to say, we've become so immersed in their worldview that we don't even notice the chiddush of it. The pasuk describes Chava as Ein Kol Chai, the mother of all living creatures. So Sadigan says, well, this is ridiculous. She's a human being. She's not the mother of all living creatures. She's not the mother of lion cubs and baby elephants and insects. It must be that Ein Kol Chai means the mother of all human living. But that's not what the pasuk says. So we have a problem over here. If you take Torah text seriously, what do? This has to be an example of where we need to move away from the literal meaning of the pasuk. Then he says, and this is for our purposes the really interesting one. He says the second reason for moving away is when it's negated by reason, by logic, by philosophical proof, where it's absolutely obvious that reason dictates that the pasuk can't be translated literally. We need to move away from this. And here he gives an example with which the Rambam would have been very comfortable. And he says the pasuk says HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Eish Ochla, Hashem is a consuming fire, a devouring fire. Now, can God really be a fire? I mean, a fire is limited. It consumes fuel. It can't go on forever. It's created. It's defective. Says Sadigan. He says it can't be that God is a consuming fire. You can't take that pasuk literally. Now again, we read these Passukim nowadays and we don't even pause and hesitate. There's no part of us that is in the least worried about taking it as a metaphor. But Sadigan saw a need to systemize this and sort of point this out. The third reason is when we have a contradiction in Passukim. We have a pasuk that tells us that an Eved is V'avadu Le'olam, should serve Hashem forever, and we have another pasuk that says he goes free in Yovel, and the like. So where there's a contradiction or stira in Passukim, and arguably Passukim that tell us Hashem is non-physical, and Passukim which tell us that he is physical, or the like. And finally, the fourth reason for taking a pasuk away from its literal meaning is when it's against Chazal, when it's against the Masorah, the tradition that we have from Torah Shebal Peh. Those are the four reasons for taking Passukim away from literal meaning. Now, he doesn't give us infinite examples of these, and therefore sometimes we're left wondering, is Ayin Tachat Ayin a problem because conceptually and reason it doesn't make sense? It's just an unfair form of punishment. There's a moral reasoning that tells us it's not right. Is it not literal because we have other Passukim that seem to imply that it's monetary compensation that you should pay when you damage someone rather than bodily mutilation, and therefore you have a contradiction in Passukim? Is it that Chazal had a Masorah, a piece of Torah Shebal Peh, that told them not to understand the Passukim literally? So again, we have a number of strata or layers, and it's not entirely clear which one it means. Sadigan gives an example. One of his examples of the Masorah in Chazal is Aboy Miakenu. The pasuk says that a person should get 40 lashes, 40 blows, 40 hits when they sin. That's makos, the punishment of makos. Now Chazal understood that to mean 39. Now, is that because of some textual clue that taught them that, or not? So Sadigan uses this as an example of tradition. The only way we know that 40 doesn't mean 40 here, but means 39, is tradition of Chazal. The Rambam in Peshuto Mishnayos says that a close textual reading will lead you to that conclusion of that it means 39, not 40. So there can be debate around this issue as to what the cause of this is. And it gets back really to our original discussion, which is how should you teach it? Is there legitimacy in teaching a child in school Ayin Tachat Ayin as an eye for an eye? Is that a justified reading of the Passukim? Ibn Ezra thought it was a justified reading of the Passukim that Nimrod was a tzaddik, or at least something good about him. Says the Ramban, Chazal, who knew these things, told us he was a rasha. And he said that Ibn Ezra is making a turning a Rasha into a tzaddik. How can Ibn Ezra do this? Now, Ibn Ezra also knew this Chazal, and he was loyal to Chazal. He fought the Karaites. He thought there was some purpose also in saying that the Peshuto Shel Mikra is that. That means that Ibn Ezra seemingly was a thought that you can wake up in the morning, you can say Bechas Torah, and your only learning of the day can be Nimrod was a tzaddik, right? Read that Passukim in which it says Nimrod had a tzaddik element to him. You can teach a child that in school as a legitimate reading of the Passukim, and that's an okay way to read the Passukim. The Rashbam thought that it was okay to read a pasuk, and that is part of Torah, and maybe you can teach a child that, to read Vayi Erev Vayi Boker to tell us that the day precedes the night, even though in halacha the night precedes the day, and if you mislearn that, you'll end up keeping Shabbos at the wrong time. So what are the layers of meaning and so on is not entirely clear. The Tzaddik seems to be saying that if you have one of these four reasons, you shouldn't translate the pasuk like that. You shouldn't translate it in a literal sense. It's not what the pasuk means. So the Rambam is maybe applying this. This is just one example in which the Rambam is saying that the simplest translation of the pasuk, when it says that Hashem has Israel and Torah, is that he has an ability to project force rather than, God forbid, an outstretched arm. Either he would understand it as miraculous, and he recognizes there can be a miracle. He's not questioning historic events in which a particular nace is described. He's merely saying that something which to say that Chava is Aim Kol Chai is simply untrue. To say that the sun is blue is simply untrue. If a pasuk tells us that there was one-off nace in which Chava gave birth to an animal, or one-off nace in which the sun as it turns a different color, he wouldn't have a problem with that, and therefore Romans are good. As it happens, in general, Rosh Hashanah, even things like that would understand it to be telling us something conceptual about how they related to it. But in the context of these four principles, Rosh Hashanah is not saying that you need to reinterpret miracles in this sim as being against anything, because they're not against reason, they're not in line with the Kabbalah of Chazal. There's nothing, they're not contradicted by that which we see, and therefore there wouldn't be a problem with that. Sorry, yeah.
Sorry. I was just thinking of those four criteria. It seems to me that, particularly with the experience of the last 150 to 200 years, is that we've seen quite remarkable changes in science and understanding.
Yes.
Would that rather suggest that we need to be very careful about coming to any kind of definitive views about what appears to be improbable or contrary to our whole perception of things today, go back 500 years or 1,000 years, totally improbable and unacceptable?
So the remarkable insights of the last couple of hundred years in the science do have a massive effect on this whole discussion. In some respects, the development of science has taught us modesty, hopefully, and removed sort of hubris and assumptions about how the world worked, and many things which were obvious facts 1,000 years ago are no longer so obvious at all. On the other hand, the development of science has posed challenges to the literal reading of certain Passukim, and really, in a sense, where I want to get to with some of this is, okay, applying our Sadigan's principles, or is it legitimate for us to relook at Passukim and say, even though for 3,300 years they were understood literally, maybe since one of Rosh Hashanah's principles is contradicted by reason, and another is contradicted by observation of the senses, and there are things that we now see through the senses that once weren't. So again, I just want to emphasize this point, not everything in science is a theory. Some of science is literally empirical. So even though 500 years ago, no one understood the heart was pumping blood around a circulatory system, today this isn't a scientific theory. This is observable. You can see the heart pumping the blood out around the body because we're capable of seeing cutting up living people, not just dead people. We're capable of actually seeing the heart in action. So science has taught us modesty around what we know and what we don't know. It's also given us things which we can now see that once upon a time they couldn't see, and therefore you have one principle of Sadigon, which is observation of senses, and it's also perhaps expanded the definition of reason. If reason teaches us something about the age of the universe, is that or does that not cross the threshold of reason, which would justify moving a pasuk away from a literal meaning? You could argue, well, science has demonstrated that. There's a lot of evidence for the scientific theory. And therefore, we should relook at Passukim and understand they can't be understood literally. And we shouldn't be afraid of that. This isn't sort of post ad hoc, justification and of things. These are the tools with which we're taught to learn the Torah. Or you can say, no, at the end of the day, it's still a speculative theory. Science changes its mind sometimes, and therefore this doesn't cross the threshold of reason. So these questions are very interesting. Again, by the way, there are Passukim very, very interestingly, which no one it's very interesting because some things that we say about moving Passukim away from literal meaning, everyone's it's a bit shocking, it's a bit disturbing, and it's maybe cutting edge, like a brave share to discuss this. Can we discuss the Passukim in the Torah, meaning that the world is billions of years old or not? And there's other things that we do without even thinking. And I mentioned the Zrona too, is something we do without thinking. There's things that we do based on modern science that no one is bothered by anymore. In fact, everyone, the most traditional reader, will say, of course, this is always what the Pasuk meant. No one ever understood it differently. We look at some of the davening, these are Passukim, but we mention them a lot in the davening of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. We talk about the heart causing sin. It's a Pasuk. The kloyos, right? The kloyos v'leiv. These are, again and again, the kidneys are mentioned as bearing culpability for the mistakes that we do. Now, kidneys have anything to do with our moral decision making. Even our heart has anything to do with our desires and our lust. So no one is bothered by that. I've never met anyone who's in the least bothered by this. It's obvious to everyone that this is a metaphor, because we know that the heart has nothing to do with it. We know that the kidneys have nothing to do with it. So what was meant by this originally? Well, it was obvious. It was always metaphor. That's obviously how everyone always understood it. Was it always obvious? Was it always known by everyone that the heart had nothing to do with passion and reason? There's reason, by the way, why the heart is associated with passion. Because when you're scared, when you're lustful, the heart begins pumping away. You feel physically your emotions are being affected. So maybe the heart is the seat of emotions. Maybe it really is the seat of drives. Maybe the kidneys do have a function in reasoning. And we know more than that. We know from ancient works that there were people around who thought exactly that. They thought that the kidneys were associated with reason and the heart was associated with desire. Now, no one takes that seriously anymore because it's almost moved from medical research to just, it's literally, you can see it. You can see that you can transfer someone's kidney from one body to another and it doesn't seem to have any effect on their moral standing. So these are areas where we very, very easily slip into Rasagigon's principles, and we use what, if we're honest, is modern insight into rereading Passukim without any nervousness about it at all. So all I'm saying in brief is, Rasagigon gave us 4 principles. These 4 principles are rules that allow us to move away from literal meaning. Whether you call that Midrash or Peshat gets caught in the sense in semantics, and the Machlokas are shown about what the relationship between the two is. But certainly it leads us to begin questioning what happens when we have modern scientific thought, which teaches us or seems to demonstrate that a pasuk contradicts sense or reasoning, and is it legitimate for us to innovate and move away from a literal translation, even though that wasn't the way it was understood throughout the generations, because Rasagigon's principles seem to allow a shifting landscape of how one understands these things. Sorry, go on.
Is it not, sometimes you can view this, is it not slightly more extreme than just looking at text figuratively, like with the rainbow?
I'm going to come on to specific examples like this, yeah. I will. So maybe actually let me just use the last few minutes, given your questions, to talk about a couple of specific examples, and then I will stop and hopefully next week, I'm laughing because Neil and I were talking in Shabbos about how many more Shira meetings in the series. Let me just try and give a couple of examples of this, and then the next week we'll look at more modern examples of this. So first of all, the Rambam himself, before we go further. So I mentioned before, the Rambam really taught us to look at 2 types of description of Hashem and understand them to be Dibra Torah Kol Hashem Le'odom. In Darren's formulation, it's using human language to describe something which isn't, which is conceptual, not human. The first example of that is physical descriptions of Hashem. Hashem having an outstretched arm or strong hands, and everyone casually does that. The second example the Rambam gives of this, or the second family of examples the Rambam gives, is around the midas of Hashem. And here, everyone struggles much more because the Rambam's point is much more subtle, but the Rambam thought both points were the same. And the Rambam says, even when we talk about Hashem being Rachum v'Chanun, Erech Apayim v'Rav Chesed v'Emes, right? The Hashem being merciful, Hashem being Gibber, being strong, Hashem being gracious, Chanun, all these terms the Rambam also understood to be metaphor, to be borrowed language, and not actually descriptive of Hashem. Because the Rambam thought that even describing Hashem as Rachum, merciful, is philosophically nonsense. And this is something that's much less well understood and much harder to relate to. But in the Rambam's idea, exactly the same as talking about Hashem having an arm. If we describe someone, let's just think for a moment, if we describe someone as merciful, what we mean is this is a character trait. This is a quality they have, which means that they are limited because their nature is to be merciful, and therefore they won't be cruel, or at least they'll be less cruel than other people because they're merciful, or they'll find it harder to be cruel. So to describe Hashem as merciful, in a sense, limits him. It takes away any glory in him being merciful because he just is merciful. That's his nature. It's not that he's choosing to be kind, and it limits him because he is merciful. That's molding him into a certain shape, not a physical shape, but a conceptual shape. The Hebrew word that we use for character traits is quite revealing in a sense. We talk about them as being midot, a midah. A midah is a measure. When I say he's got good midas, he's got bad midas, what I mean is the measure of the person, the form of the person is that of their psychology is such that they naturally behave nicely or they naturally behave inappropriately and horribly. To describe Hashem as having midas is also a type of limitation of God. In the same way as saying that Hashem has an arm is a limitation of God and attributing to him physical properties, describing him as being merciful is a limitation of Hashem and attributing to him a type of physical property. And therefore the Rambam understood that even when we talk about midas of Hashem, we have to understand this is borrowed language. This is human language, this is metaphor, this isn't literal. What do we mean when we say Hashem is Rachum? One of two things. Either we mean he does acts of Rachamim, but not that he is Rachum, and it's shorthand for it, or we mean he isn't cruel, the famous via negativa, the negative theology of the Rambam. We can't say he's not Rachum, even though we also can't say he's Rachum. But we can't say he's not Rachum, he's more than Rachum, he's beyond Rachum. The negative theology of the Rambam. Okay, this is not, for the purpose of our discussion, we're not going to go into detail in this, but just to point out that the Rambam doesn't just say this about physical descriptions of Hashem, but he even says this about any midah or any character trait that we ascribe to Hashem. This is example number one. Example number two of this, and I'll whiz through this also, the pasuk that describes, for example, Vayer Hashem Elov Be'elono Mamre, V'yoshe Pesach Ha'ol K'chom Hayom, the pasuk that describes Avraham encountering three malachim who sit down, they eat, they speak, they have dust on their feet. The Rambam understands that, again, under one of Rosh Hashanah's principles, this doesn't make sense. Malachim are angels. Angels are spiritual beings. Spiritual beings can't manifest physically. It's not the sort of thing that can sit or stand or can have dust on its feet. It can't even have feet. It's not the sort of thing that can eat. A physical being can't manifest like that. The example I often use is numbers, right? You can't say what color is the number 4. What does number 4 smell like? What shape does it have? What does it taste of? It's a concept about which taste and smell and color and shape aren't applicable. It's not the sort of thing that can have that. The Rambam says a malach isn't the sort of thing that can have a taste and a smell and a shape. A malach can't physically manifest. This isn't a limit in God's power. You can't say maybe there was a miracle. You asked earlier, you asked about Nissim, about miracles. Maybe this is a nace that happens, right? Maybe a Royal Sakonis, maybe this is a nace. This isn't the sort of thing about which a nace can happen. A miracle can't happen about this because a malach simply can't have a physical form. If a physical form appeared in front of us, we would know it's not a malach because a malach is an angel. It could be a robot. It could be a physical form controlled by a malach, controlled by Hashem, but it can't be the malach itself. Where would the malach sit in this physical body? It's not a physical being. And therefore the Rambam learns that the whole episode of Avraham encountering the 3 angels is a nevuah, is a prophecy, perhaps or perhaps not in Peshuto Shel Mikra. And maybe the Rambam argues that this translates into Peshuto Shel Mikra, maybe not, but this is a second example of this. A third example of this, and with this I'll conclude, is, but I'll mention just as Gav brought this up, is the issue of the kashes, the rainbow. The Passukim tell us that the rainbow was given by Hashem as a sign of the covenants between Noach and himself. And the Rishonim ask, but surely the rainbow is a physical event. We understand it in the laws of physics. They quote the Greeks, who have shown that if you put a light of the sun through a prism, through a drop of water, for example, it forms a rainbow. It scatters the colors through diffraction into the 7 colors of the rainbow. And therefore, how can the rainbow be described as an oath, a covenant between Hashem and humanity? So really, there's three answers that the Rishonim give to the question. Each of them interesting in the context of our discussion. The Ramban answers, it says you have to relook at the Pasuk, and we have to say the Pasuk says, not that I have created the phenomenon of a rainbow as a sign, but rather the previously existing natural physical phenomenon of a rainbow will now become a sign. This is the Ramban's view of the matter. We have to relearn the Pasuk based on what? Based on science. And as the Ramban understood that science, the scientific insight that the Greeks taught us, is sufficient justification for relearning Peshat and Pasuk. The Ramban then carries on interestingly and says, if you look with care, this actually is a jolly good Peshat and Pasuk. So this is a nice reading of the Pasuk. But the imperative that pushed him away from the simplest reading was science. He didn't say, these Greeks, what do they know? He says, we've seen that this is true, and therefore we have to read on the Passukim. The Ibn Ezra says, this is perfectly possible, that Hashem tweaked the parameters of the physical properties of the world so that the rainbow began existing, and beforehand it wouldn't have existed. You can tweak some of the properties of light, maybe, or some of the properties of prisms and raindrops so that it wouldn't manifest as a rainbow. And the miracle, or the creation, the rainbow as a sign, as a covenant, was through the changing of the laws of science. And the Stefano says, it must be that the regular rainbow is not what's being referred to in this covenant. It must be a double rainbow. You know, you sometimes see a double rainbow. That's the sign. Now, each of these three Mahalchim is interesting. The Stefano is interesting because even though in the times of the Stefano, he could say, the double rainbow is a sign because that's not a natural physical phenomena. We now know that that's also a natural physical phenomena. It's just double diffraction. But the Stefano is willing, it makes an attempt to shift the sign one stage forward, and science has since caught up with that. The Ramban is interesting because he's willing to relearn Peshat in a Pasuk. Initially, at least, even though later he says this is a very good Peshat because of science. And the Ibn Ezra is interesting because he's effectively saying, well, maybe the laws of science have changed. Now, when we look at issues around, for example, next week, touch upon briefly, issues around, for example, dating of the universe and how long it's been around, in a sense, these reflect modern approaches. All three reflect modern approaches. You have, in a way, like the God of the Gap approach, which is, okay, science has explained so far, but it hasn't explained everything. You know, maybe the regular rainbow can be explained by science, but the double rainbow can't, but then science catches up. You have an approach which says, you're right, we have to relearn the Passukim and relook at the Passukim, and maybe uncover layers of Peshat in that. And you have an approach which says, well, maybe, how can you ever speculate backwards about science? It's true that based upon the rate of decay of carbon nowadays, this would appear to be the age of the universe, or the rate of change of mutations nowadays, this would appear to be the age of the universe. But maybe in the past it was different. Maybe the rate of carbon decay was different in the past. As Ibn Ezra says, maybe the parameters of light and diffraction were different in the past, and that's what was changed through the intervention of the rainbow. So we'll see how the modern day different approaches to these things has precedence in the writings of the Rishonim in which they try and learn it. But for the purposes of our discussion, what we've seen is, again, there's issues around language that we use. So let's move away from Peshat and Midrash just temporarily because the Rishonim use this terminology different. But we've seen that the simplest literal meaning of the Passukim can be moved away from due to, as Rasadigan says, contradictions in Passukim themselves, due to reason, maybe including scientific research, due to and moral reasoning, maybe also including moral reasoning, due to a tradition of Chazal, and due to observation. Thank you, due to observation, and how that's applied going forward will, Emir Hashem, be in discussion of next week. But what we've discussed this week is how it's been applied in the past, whether when it comes to scientific observation of the rainbow, whether it comes to philosophical reason about the nature or lack of nature of God. So that's where we'll stop for today, Emir Hashem. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for joining, as always.